All right. Okay, Dave.
Barbara, let's just kind of introduce the book and how you got it started and where you got the story idea.
Sure. This book really came from Fred Scholl, who considered himself an expert on Jack Graney's Larry, as he used to be listed in the SABR directory. And when Fred helped me with research for the book that became Women at Play, this was during the late 1980s, he showed me all his clippings about Jack and Larry and urged that I write a book. But I felt Fred should write the book. And so Fred and I would go back and forth. You read it. No, you read it. No, it's your book. No, but you're the writer. And so on. And that went on for a good 5 or 6 years. And so I began to write it and went through many different forms. And I was never convinced that I would finish it or go ahead with it until I met Jack Graney's daughter and granddaughter in '03 when I was in Cleveland to speak at a celebration of Jack's 50th anniversary of retiring from being a broadcaster. And when I met them, I just felt that the funny thing is we were all staying at the same hotel, and we were having breakfast next to these two people who we began talking to, as Phil and I and Margot and Perry. And I just felt what wonderful people these are. And halfway through breakfast, I said, I'll bet that's Jack Graney's daughter and granddaughter. I didn't know it, and I no sooner thought that than Margot said, we're here to honor my father. And then I knew it. And just so meeting them and seeing what kind of people they were, very humble, but very intelligent, witty, willing to share a good story. It just made me think that must be the kind of person Jack Graney was. And I was really inspired at that point to go ahead and finish the book.
Did stories about the dog, today we would call it going viral, did they get a lot of publicity nationally about the dog? The president knew about him.
Yes. I think there were stories on Larry in every American city newspaper whenever Cleveland would visit. And Fred collected mostly the ones from Cleveland. But when I was doing some research on my own, I found articles from Boston, Detroit, I forget where else, Washington, of course, Philadelphia. And so I found articles in other cities, newspapers. So yes, the dog was well known.
Barbara, did you have any experience with bull terriers? Have you?
No, I had dogs as a kid growing up, but I never had experience with bull terriers. But the minute that I knew that I would be writing the book, I read 4 or 5 different books on bull terriers, their characteristics, okay? And then I began finding on the streets people who were walking their bull terriers, and I would stop and say, do you mind if I ask you some questions? And they were all, both the dogs and the people were very friendly. So I would ask questions and learn about the dogs that way.
So the reason I ask is because my daughter has a deaf bull terrier. And one of the reasons this book resonated with me is I laughed all the way through it because I could exactly picture. You did a great job describing the way these dogs move and what they do. They're very excitable, and I could just picture this dog, and I don't think if I didn't have any experience with that particular breed, I might not have realized it as much. But it was a great characterization of the dog throughout the book.
Thank you. Writers always like to hear that their work pays off in their reader.
Were there other copies of this? Did other teams have pets?
As far as I know, Larry was the only live animal mascot in baseball, and he was the only one selected by the players. I did read, number one, that during the 1880s, one of the teams had a pet mouse that it kept in the dugout. But the mouse didn't run around on the field, so no one other than the players could see the mouse. And then, of course, not long after Jack and Larry was published, the Milwaukee Brewers got Hank that little puppy they found at spring training that was orphaned and running around, and they took it back to Milwaukee, and it was supposed to be a team mascot. But Phil and I went to several games of the Brewers, and we looked for Hank, and they kept him in a little cage, excuse me, in the concourse area. I mean, there were signs pointing to Hank, and you could go and see Hank. He had a nice large playpen, but he didn't seem to relate to the players in any way, the way Larry did. And then after a while, there were rumors that came out a couple of years after Hank was adopted as the so-called mascot, and that is that Hank had died, and the Brewers were secretly, keeping it a secret. But that wasn't true. He may still be up there in that playpen. I don't know. So those are the only examples I know: the mouse, Larry, and Hank.
I thought the Cubs had a dog that they named after one of the streets around there.
When?
About 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I wish I could remember the name. They made a deal out of it before the season, but then I never heard of it again.
Yeah.
And animals don't last forever, and they aren't
No.
always the best behavior.
Right.
I'll look that up and
Yeah.
get back to you on that.
Okay.
Dave, I think you're referring to Clark the Cub, the mascot.
That's not the name I recall, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Clark the Cub is what they made a big deal.
Clark. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, that was his name. Yeah, Clark.
It's the mascot.
Yeah.
Barbara, could you, I know you talked about this way back in February, but your decision to write it in free verse versus, I'll call it standard for the lack of a better term.
Yeah.
What could you take us back, and what drove you to do that, and so forth? What was your thought process?
Sure. Well, I think every writer probably approaches a story in straightforward prose, just straight narrative. That's certainly how I approach 90% of my books. In fact, that's kind of the fallback position. I was thinking that that's how I would do it. And I tried, and I ran into many roadblocks. First of all, I tried it as a kid's book, a picture book, Larry Leaps In. And that it felt flat to me, and editors weren't interested in it. And so then I decided, okay, I will do it as a teen book. And I went for straight prose, straight narrative. But what I found there was there just wasn't at that time enough information on Jack Graney. I would have to start inventing things, to flesh out the prose. And I didn't want to go down that route I didn't want to go down the route of assuming that I knew what his motivations were, and assuming I knew things that I didn't really know. So I abandoned that. Then Fred and I tried working on an article for Timeline magazine, and that, for some reason, we just couldn't get it in any way that had life to it. So then I decided, well, one of the problems here really is that I don't have enough information. There was no master's or doctor's theses on Jack Graney the way they were even on women in baseball back when I was researching that. There were people who wrote theses about women in baseball. There was nothing like that with Jack Graney. There were no oral history interviews, no long ones. There was no autobiography. There was no biography. So I was really stuck with getting information. And that's when I kind of thought, of looking through a knothole at a baseball game, the way you see cartoons from the early 1900s. And
Ryan, could you mute yourself, please? Ryan, we're getting a lot of background noise from you. If you could mute yourself, please.
And so I thought that I would take these little clippings that Fred gave me and look at each one in a very small way, just as an incident. And the only way that's going to look good on the page is as a poem. I can't have a sentence a page, so that's how I ended up with the verse.
That's a fascinating story. Thank you. And clearly Fred played such an important support role for you throughout the history of this book, so to speak, in its creation.
Yes, absolutely.
Nate,
And-
thank you for sharing. That to me is fascinating.
When you, how was the book received? Did schools support it by having their kids read it and that kind of thing?
Yes, I think I said the last month, it wasn't received well by editors. I tried for 4 years to get it published in traditional channels. And I think I said last month that the responses I got were things like, if you could set this book in San Francisco, we would buy it. Yeah, things that make a writer gnash their teeth, or if you could make this book about either Jack or Larry, we would buy it. But we don't like both of them together. A book has to be about one hero, So I ran into 4 years of that and finally decided that the 100th anniversary of Larry joining the team would be 2012. So I self-published it. Okay. And then, of course, once you self-publish, marketing is really hard because major publishers have marketing departments and a single writer does not have a marketing department. But I decided that I would market it toward #1, baseball fans, #2, bull terrier lovers. There's bull terrier societies in certainly in every state and practically in every town in the country. I didn't know that before. And to middle grade schools. Yes, so your question was specifically how did middle grade schools or how did schools receive it? I think that they were very supportive. I got several speaking engagements at schools in which they actually had me talk to the kids in 2 groups. They had grades 4 through 6 in one group, and I talked to them about the book. And then they had me go to another assembly in which I talked to grades 7 through 9 about the book. I found that kind of interesting, but I think that was because the level of understanding of each group was slightly different. The 4th to 6th graders were more interested in the dog, and the 7th through 9th graders were kind of interested in why I did certain things, like why did you have this happen in the book, or why did you look at it this way? So I think they were studying literature, I suspect.
Barbara, I have a question. At various places, am I muted? No.
No, you're not. You're fine, John.
Okay, at various places through the book, you have what appears to be almost a footnote with something that explains something about bull terriers, or when he died, you had a nice excerpt from a story from the Cleveland Press from that time. And those were really very helpful. What prompted you to put those in?
Oh, I love that question because that was a hard decision. Okay. I felt as I began writing the book that, oh my God, if I don't convey who Shoeless Joe Jackson is, okay, or if I don't convey who Nap Lajoie is, okay, if I don't tell them these things, they are missing an essential glue that is going to hold these stories together. They won't be able to understand the whole story. And so the question was how to get that information. And I just couldn't see myself writing a poem about the background, the things that the readers needed to know. So then it became a matter of, okay, do I footnote these and put them at the back of the book? Okay, or do I footnote them and put them at the bottom of each page? I actually tried all those things, and I was concerned with how this looked on the page. I, as a reader, really prefer footnotes on the bottom of a page. I'm talking adult books, okay, so that I don't have to go to the back of the book to read a footnote. Okay. But my real preference is to have everything in the text so that there's no footnote at all. And I couldn't do that here. So I kind of experimented. I said it has to be on the page. That was the major decision I made. The information has to be on the page where the topic first comes up. And then I tried taking it down the side of the page, you know, again, in a gray box. And that was too difficult to do and detracted from the poem because the eye would wander from the poem to what was coming down the side of the page. So then I just went with that gray box at the bottom of the page.
That was actually very helpful and very informative.
Thank
You
you.
know, and I think you're right about people who are interested in the dogs would find this book. As soon as I told my daughter about it, she wants to read the book, and she's not really a baseball fan, but she would enjoy the book because of the relationship between the dog and Jack,
Yeah.
which is really what the book is about to me.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You should.
It's not every writer who can handle their own typography. You know,
Yeah.
what program did you use to put that all together?
Okay, okay, this would have been late 2011 when I was putting it together. I've had a Mac since 1984, and so that's what I work on. And I don't know I think it was Pages. That's what I work in now, Macintosh, Apple Pages. It was fairly easy to do. Yeah, fairly
Did
easy.
you enjoy that flexibility, that bigger page that you had? Had you ever wished you could have done your own typography before?
You mean in my traditionally published books?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because, you know, Women at Play, which Harcourt published, won the Benjamin Franklin Award for Best Designed Sports Book of the Year. So, hey, I could not have done that, believe me.
Yeah.
But there's a funny story there. I don't know if I mentioned this last month. When Women at Play came out, I noticed that certain friends of mine weren't buying the book. I don't keep track of whether my friends buy my books, but this was conspicuous. They were diehard baseball fans, okay, and yet they hadn't bought my book or read it. And so I finally asked one of them. I said, "Hey, Mike, you know, I noticed you haven't read my book." I should say read rather than bought, because you could get a book from a library. And these people, there were three of them, one even from Australia, said, "It's square. I can't read a square book." This was news to me. And so I began asking, I thought they were joking. I thought they were pulling my leg. But no, it turns out that some people really hate square things. And so I don't know, that's just sort of off the track of Jack and Larry. But yeah, I'm not, to go back to the question, I really like the way my traditionally published books were designed. In fact, my current one, I'm also hoping may get a mention as a Benjamin Franklin Award for a YA. This is the F Words. It's incredibly well designed. It has text in it, emails, poetry, and straight prose. And so I don't know, I would have had the skill to handle that.
What was the name of that book again?
The F Words, not words, the F Words.
Is it about those words?
Yeah.
Words?
Yes, I guarantee the F word is in the book, okay?
Oh,
But there's other F words like family, fair, fight, foe, friend, okay? In the English language, only 5% of all the words we use every day go way back in time, in Anglo-Saxon from 1,000 years ago, but they are mostly single syllable words that mean, they're kind of visceral. They're some of the most common words we use, okay? Like the ones I just mentioned: friend, family, father, foe, fight, fear, find. And most of these words begin with either F or W. I have no idea why that is, but so the book is titled The F Words. But when it came out in September and I was at the Chicago Book Fest at a lit table selling the book, that's why I laughed at what you said, is that almost everyone who came up said, "Is the F word in the book?"
Like that.
where do I turn that?
They wanted it to be there.
Barbara, before you wrote the book we're talking about for the most
Yeah.
part today, would you have classified yourself as a baseball fan?
Oh, yeah, I grew up playing baseball. I played hardball with kids. I grew up in an industrial area just north of Youngstown. I was a baseball fan. As I was growing up, I was a fan of the Cleveland Indians, the Brooklyn Dodgers because of Jackie Robinson, and the Boston Red Sox because of Ted Williams, and the Detroit Tigers because of Al Kaline. And I think that kind of tells you my baseball history, is that I was never really focused on one city. You know, I was a baseball fan. I had particular teams, but I didn't confine myself to those teams. But yes, I was a
But then as a result of writing the book, did it change your character as a baseball fan, or did it in any way impact you on your perspective on baseball, maybe on the Indians, et cetera? Did it have any impact on the author?
Oh, absolutely. It taught me a lot about Jack Graney, you know, who he retired in 1953, and I was just in grade school then, and I probably heard him on the radio, but I don't remember it. Okay, and so I learned a really important part of Cleveland history, of team history, and I learned as much after the book came out, and I began mining newspaper databases for Jack Graney, which wasn't possible back when I was writing the book. I think I began doing that in 2015 or 16, and found out all kinds of things. For instance, Jack and several other players probably had the Spanish flu, and he was out for like 3 weeks, and I think it was 1917, with the flu. It was very serious. I didn't know that when I was writing the book, and it made me think about the Cleveland teams and spring training, and just the teams in general, and how they reacted to and suffered from the Spanish flu. So I learned that, and I learned a lot about animosities on the teams in those days, between individual players and teams. There was a lot of fighting. Okay, I think I knew that before I wrote the book, but as I was researching it, I learned a lot about that. It just gave me a greater appreciation of all of Cleveland baseball history. I will tell you that when I had to decide whether to end the book on the World Series, okay, whether I should write about the World Series, there was a lot of discussion in my writing group about how I should end the book. I'll talk about that later if you want, but wow, I loved writing about that 1920 World Series. I knew about it, of course, before I wrote the book, but just researching it more and having to condense it into 1 page per game. It was fun.
You said writing, you had a writing group.
Yes, I belonged to a writing group for 20 years. Most writers do. And we exchange what we've written, and we give detailed critiques.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't appreciate that at all. That's really neat.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what I was starting to say was I had a technical problem once Larry died in 1917. Okay, there's a book, Jack and Larry is gone. How far into the future do I continue the book? And I knew that I wanted to go through the 1920 World Series, because that's what the book was aiming toward, as well as being a relationship between Jack and Larry. So I had a problem. Half the group wanted me to end it there at 1917, and the other half wanted me to continue. I continued, but then my problem was how to keep Larry alive, okay, through the remaining pages of the books. And you may see, if you've read the book, that the way I did that was I said, I put in little reminders like, just as Larry would have something, okay, like every 4th or 5th page, to keep them Larry in the reader's mind.
That's very good. Thank you for sharing. Wow.
I have a question about Larry when he got mugged and died. Approximately how old was he? And I mean, did he have like a typical lifespan, 5 years more if he would have survived, or?
He probably did. Let me sort of go over it right now in my mind. If I recall, the trainer, Doc White, who gave the dog to the team, said that the dog was about 2 years old, maybe not quite 2 years old. So that would have been 1912. Yeah, so
Okay.
it would have been 7 or 8. Larry would have been 7 or 8 years old when he died.
Okay, so he probably had another 5 years, and
Yeah.
at least if he survived. So
Yeah.
that, I think that's part of the tragedy too. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like he was 15 years old or something.
Did
Thank
Jack
you.
have a lot of regret about having lost track of the dog?
I'm
This-
sorry,
That
I
seemed
didn't-
like a. Did Jack have remorse about having lost track of the dog before he
yes.
died?
Yes, his daughter said he did, very much so, yeah. The Washington newspapers reported that when Jack received news of Larry's death, that the players were sitting in the lobby of the hotel because it was raining and the game was delayed, and that they all just sort of stood up and put their arms around each other and cried. Yeah, I'm sure he felt guilt.
Is it true that at that time in cities, it was more likely for dogs to be running loose than we see nowadays? I remember that when I was a kid, that there were stray dogs more commonly.
Yeah, yeah, likewise, I don't remember in this town that I grew up in, I don't remember anyone having their dog on a leash. That would have just been odd. So I suspect it was. I'm guessing that leash laws didn't come into being until we became more populated, you know, and dogs became more of a problem.
It just seemed like
Barbara-
a very violent thing to happen, you know. Maybe it was more common then, but the idea of a dog fight, I think maybe I've only seen that once or twice. They're terrible.
Oh,
And-
yeah,
and it sounds, it sounds like they virtually killed him. Yeah.
yeah. You're talking about the dog fight at spring training in San Antonio? Oh, no, you're talking
No.
about the one that in which Larry got rabies. Yeah.
Yeah. Joe, did
Barbara,
you have a
was-
question?
Yeah, was there a lot that you had to leave out of the book that you would like to have put in, but the book would have grown too large?
No, because I was working mainly from everything that Fred gave me. So there wasn't anything that I had to leave out. On the contrary, it's sort of the opposite problem that after the book came out and I started the Jack and Larry page on Facebook, I began doing more research so that I could feed the Jack and Larry page, okay, and promote the book and keep sort of the legend of Jack and Larry alive. And that is when I began having access to like 250 newspapers from across the country on the databases, I began learning things that I didn't know, such as the fact that when Jack was in the minors for the Portland Beavers, he pitched 18 innings of a game, as did the other pitcher. Each team just went through one pitcher, and the game was tied 1-1 and called because of darkness. And I thought, and it was 92 degrees up. And I thought, wow, what's that tell us about Jack's character and the character of players in those days and determination? So I think that those are, I just found fascinating things like that he probably had the Spanish flu, that he was on the first team to go to Japan. He went with a Reach tour in 1913. I think that had I known all those things back in 2010 when I was writing the book, I think they would have bogged me down. I wouldn't have known, because some of those are pre-Larry, post-Larry. I wouldn't have known what to do about them. it would have required a different kind of book, and I'm not sure what kind.
Barbara, have you seen an uptick in sales since Jack got the Frick Award?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
And Barbara, I'm not sure when Jack was a broadcaster, and that was before my time. I didn't hear him obviously, but do you know if he had another person in the booth the way they have like a color man today? Or was that a solo job to broadcast the games?
Well, I think that when he first started in 1932, actually maybe Morris, you know this more than me, I don't know. I don't think he had anyone with him the first couple of years, but I could be wrong. He certainly did at the end.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then it was Pinky Hunter for many years. And then from about 48 to 53, it was Jimmy Dudley.
Right.
And Morris, didn't Jimmy Dudley credit Jack Graney as being his mentor?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
I think when he won the Ford Frick Award.
Yeah. Barbara, can you tell us about the pictures behind you? I've been waiting patiently to ask that again.
Yes, these were from Fred's files. Okay, the one of Larry standing on Jack's shoulders is from February of 1913. I think it's from the PD. It's when Jack and Larry came from Canada to Cleveland to go south with the team for spring training. In fact, I think there is a poem about that in the book. The other one is, it must be very early. I'm guessing like 1912 or 13. I don't know its source, but it's a newspaper, as you can tell, but I don't know its source.
Barbara will remember that Fred loved the illustrations in the old newspapers. And, you know, back in the day when Fred was still with us, the procedure, such as it was to go down to Cleveland Public Library and go into the microfilm room and get your microfilm, and you could walk right up, grab your reel, put it on the machine and start looking. I remember Fred bemoaning, he'd go in and be looking for something and get so caught up in other things as he was looking through the newspapers on the microfilm that he'd get distracted and like that. But he loved the illustrations. And in the earlier days of the Jack Graney chapter, you know, Fred was a school teacher, and he would do his transparencies. And we had a lot of the early chapter meetings at Cleveland State University. And he'd have his overhead projector and he'd have all his transparencies, and he would do various presentations on the illustrations. And of course, now when you can get the plain dealer at home with a good internet connection, it seems easier than ever to go back and look at those for people that want to.
Yeah, I think Fred, I recall, maybe back in the 80s, gave a SABR conference presentation on those, like a short 15-minute presentation on those cartoons and things. Yeah, he used to love those. And as you say, of course, Fred was very interested in the Civil War, belonged to the Civil War Roundtable, and would, as he was researching, go off on all kinds of tangents. Once he was sending me Jack and Larry clippings, and in with the clippings mixed in was a whole history of Toledo. Okay. I remember I called him up and said, Fred, what is it? What's this Toledo have to do with Jack and Larry? He said, oh, I got carried away. I didn't mean to send those to you.
Anybody else have with a question?
You may have mentioned this last time, but any the discussion or thoughts about doing a longer form book on Jack's life?
Good question.
Not for me, because I'm not sure I could follow through on the research necessary to do it justice. And that is because I have 3 other books lined up to do, okay? But, you know, one of the Graney gang in St. Thomas, Ontario is doing something on Jack's life. Bill Renner, what is his last name? It's not Reynolds, it's something like that. It might be Reynolds. He has pretty much, I haven't read it, but he said he had it up to like 140 pages or so. So I don't know what it's like. But I wish someone would.
Maybe I missed it, Barbara, but can you talk about what you're working on?
I'm working on a middle grades book, say for grades maybe 5 to 8 on a historic cross-country horse race.
Oh, that's right, yes, okay.
And I'm trying to write it as a ballad, and I'm having great difficulty with ballads.
What year did that happen?
It happened in 1976 to celebrate the bicentennial, but I'm setting it in the present day. So you think you could say that it's a fictionalized version of that, you know, using that as a resource.
What kind
Barbara,
of path did it follow?
Pardon?
Go ahead, Dave.
What kind of path did you follow?
What kind of?
I was asking what route they took. The horses.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I'm having great difficulty understanding. It's breaking up. They went from upstate New York, Herkimer, someplace like that.
Herkimer?
Herkimer, yeah. Across the country to Sacramento. The route wasn't straight, so they followed, once they got west of the Mississippi, they followed the old wagon trail routes. But east of the Mississippi, they kind of came down through Ohio, down Akron and around and across to Indiana at Indianapolis, just south of Indianapolis. They had a route manager who, like the barnstorming baseball team managers, was usually a week or 2 ahead of the team and would arrange for communities to donate their barns or their fairgrounds or something for the horses and riders to stay at, and arrange for food and stuff for them. So the route sort of changed, is they didn't know when they left Herkimer what the exact route was. They probably knew a week or 2 of the route, and then they would get more of it as they went along.
Barbara, am I correct in listening to you? You were self-taught in self-publishing. Is that right? You learned how to do it as you did it?
I did. It was kind of traumatic.
Yeah, I was wondering, how hard was it? What are those lessons learned, experiences gained like? What were they like?
Well, here's the thing. I had an advantage that perhaps most people who go into self-publishing don't, and that is that I worked as a professional typesetter for the Boston Globe and the Chicago Tribune for several years. So I knew typesetting. In late 2009, I decided I would self-publish my first book in 2010. And I chose She's On First because it had gone out of print and the rights had reverted to me. And I figured, okay, no matter how hard I try, I'm going to make mistakes. So I'd rather make them on a book that's a reprint than a book that's brand new. Okay, it just does not look good to have mistakes in a new release. Reviewers always jump on them and you get criticized. So I thought, okay, not only have I been a typesetter, but I have had a Macintosh since 1984. This shouldn't be too difficult. Well, I had never done page makeup on the computer. I had just done 8.5 by 11 pages, manuscript pages. So I taught myself how to do page makeup on the computer. But what I had the most difficulty with, I absolutely could not get headers and footers into that manuscript. She's on First, no matter what I did. I think I really spent 3 weeks just pulling my hair out as I was trying to get headers and footers in. So I walked down to the Apple store on Michigan Avenue with my little, what's that thing called? That you plug in. I can't think of the name.
Thumb
is-
drive?
Flash drive?
Last drive.
Yeah, flash drive, thank you. And I gave it to the Apple genius, one of the Apple geniuses at the door, and I said, here's my problem. Okay, when I opened up the document, and he looked at it, and literally, in 3 seconds, 3 seconds, he showed me how to do this. There was some little drag down of a drag down of a drag down of a drag down menu that I hadn't gone into. And so I knew it, and that enabled me to put in the headers and footers. So the first book was extremely frustrating because of that one problem. And also I think I chose a font that wasn't the wisest choice for a self-published book. If you happen to see one of the self-published copies of She's on First, the font, which has been discontinued, I think it's called New Pentamen. When I switched to italics or numbers, as in scores of baseball games, it just was really weird. And I was so obsessed with headers and footers that I didn't notice that. So I made those 2 mistakes. It was very frustrating. But after that, it was easy. I mean, you know, after that, I knew how to put in headers and footers, and it went smoothly.
Oh, a fascinating story.
Barbara, is Women at Play still in print?
No, Women at Play went through 2 printings, okay, and then Harcourt reverted the rights to me, and my agent had many different publishers interested in it. University of Nebraska Press, for instance, and they would have bought the plates, all right, but they were square. And square books apparently cost a lot more to publish than regular books, because printing presses aren't set up that way. You don't buy paper in that. It was just horribly expensive. University of Illinois was interested in it. They rejected it for the same reason. Even though they got the plates for free, it would just cost too much to print. So it was really out of print for over 20 years. And then I decided that I would publish it as a digital book, because, as I said, all rights had reverted to me. But what I found was that I would have had to pay for the photos all over again. And there were 99 photos in the book, and it would have, back when the book was published, I had to pay for the photos, and they were $5,600. But that came out of my advance, and my agent negotiated that they added the money onto the advance. So I got my advance plus 5,600, and so it kind of was a wash. But I would have had to pay all over again, and probably more. It would have amounted to $8,000 for the rights to the digital book. So I just printed it without photos, with an apology at the beginning and end as to why the photos weren't there. So it's only out in digital form now.
Do you know how many total
Copies
units? Yeah, how many total are out in the market of the original?
of the original. I think there were like maybe 26,000 total for both press runs. I think the first press run was something like 23,000, and the second was 3,000 or 4,000. And there was a funny story there that it was in every library in the country practically, because it was the first book on women in baseball. And I was taking, Phil and I were taking my parents out west, and we would stop in small towns in Kansas, okay, Wyoming, and there it was in the library. That really made me feel good. I mean, and over the years, like, okay, it came out in 1993, around 06, 07, 08, I began noticing on Amazon that people were selling used copies of Women at Play, and it said library copy. Okay, so libraries were divesting themselves of the book. which is understandable. They can hold only so many books on their shelves, you know, and this is a common process. So there were really thousands of library books for sale over the years on Amazon and elsewhere. Then Tim Wiles asked me if I would donate all my notes to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And so I said, yes, I would, but I got them in order first. And I think I mentioned this last month, as I was getting them in order, I said, well, why not self-publish these as research notes for anyone who wants them? So the first research notes for women at play, I think came out in, the last one came out in 15, the second one in 2013. So I'm guessing 2011 is when it came out. Okay, then what happened was I noticed that libraries were rebuying the old copies that they had sold to Amazon. They were rebuying them because they were buying research notes for women at play. And so they felt, I guess, some sort of educational obligation or moral obligation that since they had the research notes for the book, they needed the original book. I thought that was kind of humorous.
How many sets of the research notes are there now?
There's 3 volumes, and that's all there is. And there's another interesting story there. When I conceived, after Tim asked me to donate these, and I said, okay, but it's going to take me a couple of years to get them in order. They were in order back in 1993, but once Women at Play came out, I just would get countless letters and phone calls from people wanting information. I would get letters from Italy, for instance, Poland, around the world. And so I would pull this information out of the files, and over 20 years, it just got to be such a mess. So I was going to put it all in order and give it to the Baseball Hall of Fame, which I did. But I thought as I was doing it, okay, I'm going to publish the research notes. So my first question was, the ones that are in the public domain, okay, that would take me up to about 1923. If I publish them all as one, it would be a 450-page book, and I didn't feel researchers could use that. When they opened it up, you couldn't even see in the center unless I had gigantic margins. So I went with 3 volumes, and I thought I absolutely wanted to go with a 4th volume called Research Notes for Women at Play, the interviews, because I had interviewed all kinds of Cleveland Indians players who had played with Babe Didrikson in spring training. I had interviewed all the women who played. I mean, I interviewed Mary Gilroy Hockenberry, who played baseball in 1917. I had many, many interviews with them. And I felt these would be invaluable to baseball researchers of all kinds. Clem Driesward, I had tons of interviews with him. Then some little niggling voice said to me, okay, is this legal? Who owns these? Who owns the copyright to these interviews? Is it me, the person who took the interview, or is it the person who spoke to me? So I called the Authors Guild attorney and I asked her, and she said, oh boy, she said, that is such a murky issue. She said, legally, the interviews are owned by the person who granted them to you. Okay, not me, not the person doing, but the person who spoke to me. She said, however, public sentiment is on the side that they belong to the person who took the interview, me. She said, it hasn't been tested in law yet. If it does get tested in law, it's going to be a 4 or 5 year case. So she said, as much as I want to tell you that you should print them, she said, the right thing to do is not print them because you don't want to be involved in a court case. So that 4th volume, the volume of the interviews, which was kind of what I was working toward, which is the thing I thought people would like the most, was never printed. But they're all at the Baseball Hall of Fame, so all the interviews.
Do you think teams should have dogs as mascots again?
I love that question. I don't think it worked out so well in Cincinnati. We had dog poop on the field and the players stepping in it. I suspect not. Uh, uh, I don't know if, in addition to everything else that, that there should be live animals on the field.
Did they have that problem in Cleveland with,
With dog poop?
yeah,
I never read anything about it, but that's not the kind of thing they would have mentioned back in the 1910s and 20s.
I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It just seems like baseball could use something cute and adorable right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about, dog poop on the infield. I'd be more worried about it in the hotels.
Well, yeah. If they took them there, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anybody else have a question?
No, this has been a great conversation, Barbara. Thank you so
I've
much.
enjoyed this so much.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you so
Enjoyed it.
much.
Thanks for inviting me.
Well, this is the time when I always ask and rarely get a good answer. What shall we read it the next time? Does anybody have a suggestion for our next version of this? Barbara, do you have suggestions for us to read?
Yeah, the Joe Wancho's Al Rosen biography, which I think has been mentioned before, and I think maybe when it was mentioned in the past, it had not been published and available yet. It's now available. And the other is the Sam McDowell book, which I haven't seen yet, but I know it's out there.
Okay. Okay.
And Scott Longert's latest novel or book is out now too. So
Okay.
that's 3 fairly easy pickings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, if all of you can write to me about which one you particularly want, and I'll send it out to the large group, and we'll make a decision soon. Barbara, I want to
I
thank
think
you.
I
You've
could
helped-
say that we would love to have you continue to be a member, an adjunct member of this August book club. We would love, we love anybody who wants to come and participate. So if it's there for you, we would love to have you continue to be with us.
Well, thank you. How do I do that?
Well, we'll send you the contract and have our lawyer talk to your lawyer.
And make out the check to me. And
It might have already happened involuntarily, Barbara. we like you to keep on our mailing list.
Yeah,
And I
after
keep
all
the
said
other
and done,
off-
you're on the mailing list. So yeah,
Yeah,
That's
you're a
fine.
member now.
I would enjoy that.
good. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I think we've all really
Conversation.
enjoyed this with you today, and it kind of takes off where last month left off, and it's fun to be able to spend more time with you.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
hi, everyone.
Okay, have a great weekend, everybody.
See ya.
Thank you.
Nice
care.
talking with you.